magnificent men in their flying machines. They go up to the up, they go down to the down. They enchant all the ladies and steal all the scenes with their up to the up, and then down to the down. Up, down, flying around, looping the loop and defying the ground. They're all rightfully keen, those magnificent men in their flying machines.
Due to the pandemic, this video was recorded via the internet, using multiple computers to allow for social distancing. You may notice occasional glitches in the transmission quality because of this. Thank you for joining us and enjoy this great history.
The Code 3. A live podcast sponsored by the Marin Fire History Group. All about the history of the fire service in Marin County, California. And now your host, retired Fire Chief Paul Smith.
And this afternoon, we're at Woodacre, California, at the Marin County Fire Headquarters. And our guests today are Ken Mizuko, retired Fire Chief with Marin County, Jim Selfridge, retired Deputy Chief with Marin County, and our special guest this afternoon, Jimmy Barnes. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome.
Okay, so why don't we talk about how you got started with the CAL FIRE Air Program?
Yeah, well, I was digging sewers for my brother, and a buddy of mine said, "Hey, you want to fly air attack up in Bonneville?" So I signed up for that. That was quite a long time ago.
And understand that your so every year the contract got renewed.
Mm-hmm. As far as the pilots were concerned, it was a year at a time job.
Okay. Yeah. And what did you start flying, Jimmy?
I started flying for CAL FIRE, CDF then, in the O2, the air attack ship.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I started out in Bonneville. Flew up there for Burge Harvey. I don't know if you guys remember him.
Yeah. George
Sprout. So that was my first job, trying to get in and out of Bonneville and fog.
and because we've got a couple ground firefighter here today, Selfridge and Ken Mizuko, and you and I have talked before, Jimmy, about how you coordinate and help the fighters with their mission. So, Jim, can you talk about how the whole go through? You get on the scene and you call for the aircraft.
Well, initially, in the old days, when the incident commander, battalion chief, whatever, got on the scene, you would request aircraft. Today, they're part of the initial dispatch, and of course the closest air base is Sonoma County Airport, and that's where Jimmy did a lot of his flying out of, and then when the air attack would show up, we would, as the incident commander, we would discuss how we were going to utilize the aircraft into our tactical plan. And if we needed more, we'd order more. He would order them, and then we would back up the order from the ground in here at our command center, and we were off and running.
Yeah. So, Jimmy, you were actually an air attack pilot?
That's how I CAL FIRE.
Yeah.
Back in the early 80s.
And
Well, I flew air attack for a couple of years, Bonneville, and then I went to Porterville. So I got the SoCal picture. And the beauty of that was flying with a fire control expert and watching them conduct the operations in concert with the IC. And learned a lot about fire control sitting in that pilot seat, because all I had to do was fly the plane. I had a ringside seat for the whole fire. both in Northern and Southern California. So it was a great education being an air tech.
Jimmy, why don't you talk, tactically, the use of aircraft and, I know there's been some discussion over the years as far as what the pilots like to see versus maybe what some of the ground people how they want to utilize the aircraft, and how the ground firefighters can get the best utilization out of the aircraft.
Well, I think CAL FIRE and Marin County have worked that out pretty well. We're there to support our ground.
And you usually like to start at an anchor point?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, anchor, flank, and hook. That's the old mantra that works. Headhunting is usually a loser, We call them chevrons of shame, where you put a V off the head and it burns around both sides without ground support.
So initially, when you started flying, Jimmy, were you going to wildland maybe weren't in the WUI, or on your career seeing more wildland interface with the built in the wildland areas? When you started this, was it mostly just, or were you protecting homes back then too? And has that home protection piece become more prominent?
Well, when I started, I was in the wilder country at Ronerville, forest lands, and in Porterville, a lot of grasslands. But then as I shifted into the air tankers and was stationed in Redding and Santa Rosa and Ukiah, then it was a lot of wildland urban interface. That was the most challenging fire especially for an airplane to fight, because we had more opportunities to do collateral damage on each drop.
I'll tell you a good urban interface Jimmy Barnes story. CDF had an experimental turboprop tanker back in the mid 80s, Tanker 100. Yeah. And he was the driver.
Well, yeah, I was the second driver. It was a weird twist of fate that put me into that airplane, because I was still kind of a rookie, but it turned out nobody else wanted to fly that thing because they didn't think it was here to stay. So I got a chance to get in it.
We had this fire, and he would beat the air attack to the fire, because that was a faster plane than the air attack plane. And we had a fire above Fairfax. Matter of fact, it started just up around the corner from Chief Rowan's house. And it was making a major run up the hill to the top of Oak Springs. And there was like 6 houses up there, and Jimmy comes in, and I get on the radio with Jim, and I say, we're going to lose those 6 houses if you can't make a drop across in front of them really quick. And he did this incredible drop going north-south, and then he did like a fighter turn and came back and made another drop south-north, and those houses were saved. Most incredible thing I've ever seen an air tanker do.
Well, that fire made me famous, Jim, because my tanker drop did more damage than the fire did.
Well, the fire would have taken out the 5 houses had he not painted them pink. But
we had a great initial attack from the ground on that fire. Mariani running down that flank, I think, had a lot to do with. I filled Werner's boots up with mud.
Hey, Jim, can you talk about, the strategy shift from basically initial attack to an extended attack fire as far as using aircraft?
Yeah. Initial attack, rapid response initial attack, that's the holy grail of firefighting for CAL FIRE and Marin County Fire as well. They want to get that fire stopped under 10 acres, and the window of opportunity for that to happen is closing from the minute you get the call. And so rapid response from the aircraft, if we can get out there and help, then we can help keep it in the initial attack phase. Once we lose it, then we're in extended attack. And then we know what happens.
How about the evolution of aircraft over the years?
10 light years. Initially, air tankers, they started experimenting with air tankers a long time ago, and with marginal success.
Right.
And originally, ag operators would get some old World War II derelict and put some kind of a tank on it, and then did freelance. The state or the feds would hire them out for fire, and they just moved from fire to fire.
The very first time I ever saw an airdrop in Marin County was in the Black Canyon fire in 1964. And if my memory serves me correctly, it was a biplane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's probably an M3N. Frank Prentice was the first tanker pilot in California.
And then the transition up through the TBMs, the F7Fs, and the B-17, the PBYs, and you're more versed.
And the pilots and the planes were the same vintage, the World War II guys, and the planes too.
Yeah. And so initially you flew surplus equipment. Is that what Cal Fire did? That was their fleet?
Contractors.
Yeah, contract fleets.
Cal Fire owned the aircraft, and the contractors operated and provided crews. The S2 was the original idea for it came from a guy named Floyd Wakely. They became surplus, and they were a good airplane, and so he came up with the idea to use to convert to air tankers, and so they did. And initially had a lot of Navy pilots flying them, but we were killing a guy every 2 years. Somebody get killed in an S2, and we finally figured it out that we're not flying it fast enough on fires. The Navy pilots would come aboard the ship at 85 knots, and they were trying to drop on fires at 100 knots, and it really wasn't safe to do anything less than about 120 knots. So we had a lot of stall.
And then how did that evolve generation of plane?
Well, Cal Fire wanted to get out of the fixed wing business. They wanted to scuttle their S2 fleet. And Cotton Mason, the chief of aviation, wanted to turboprop the S2s, the current ones that we had, to see how that would work out, to get an R&D program for that. So, Chief Bill Ty and people like that wanted to have a complete paradigm shift in the air program. We weren't going to be an initial attack fixed wing fleet anymore. We're going to have fewer but bigger air tankers at master tanker bases and supplement the initial attack with more helicopters. But the S2T came online, and one of the big problems with the S2 is the engines were designed in 1936, the original 1820. And so these were 1960s, 1950s engines, and we were blowing every couple hundred hours an engine to blow up. You can count on it. And they couldn't maintain it well anymore. So the S2T was what we had hoped was it would give us another 20 years for the S2 with the state-of-the-art turboprop engines on there. And the R&D project pretty much proved that to be viable.
So they took the S2 fuselage frame and added this new
That was the original idea, but our chief of aviation maintenance decided it'd be far better to get the newest, latest variant from the Navy, from the GSA, and use those newer airframes. They were bigger, and they had very little airframe time on them. So he got hold of those aircraft, and they turbopropped those with bigger engines than the one that I had. They were, I believe mine was 1,200 shaft horsepower. The ones we're flying today are 1,650 shaft horsepower on both sides.
So a lot more reliable.
They're a lot more reliable. And, very few failures.
Safer aircraft, stronger aircraft. And you fly those too, Jim?
Oh yeah, I started out in the radial engine S2s.
So you flew the S2T?
That was the second pilot to fly the S2T.
And was that like a 1960s car? You like,
Yeah, we went from a 1950 to a 60s variant. It was a bigger airplane. The S2s we had were training variants. They weren't warbirds. And then we went to the torpedo bomber. It was longer, or not longer, but bigger wing, bigger tail. And they put the bigger engines on it, and it became a pretty spectacular performer.
you fought?
Jimmy, I know we've lost a lot of air tanker pilots over the years, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the Air Tanker Pilots Association and what they did for the widows of some of the pilots and how that all worked into the air program.
Yeah, well, we, like I said, we're losing an S2 pilot about every other year. And we had an old Air Force colonel and a Navy commander come in and try to figure out what was going on. And it turned out that the way we were flying it was wrong. We had to adjust our approach speeds. They were flying it too slow, for one thing. We're getting a lot of stalls. At that altitude, you can't do that. So the training improved dramatically. And with the S2T, the performance improved dramatically. So the critical pilot operations during an emergency were reduced dramatically. So it's just a much more pilot-friendly airplane.
And then how did this kind of programs start?
That happened when a friend of mine, flying out of Ukiah, crashed in the Mill Creek drainage. I know you guys are familiar with that. I forget what the name of the fire was, but we called it the Friday the 13th fire because it started on Friday the 13th. And some crews at the fire busted a hose. The crew bus rolled over some of the inmates. And all the urgency of what was going on at the fire kind of led back to the tanker base. So this pilot, Ed Bell, was trying to get back to the fire as fast as he could. So instead of going around the Cow Mountain Range, he tried to go over it. And he couldn't make it. He couldn't make it over that terrain. And instead of getting rid of his load, which might have saved his life, he just went in right at the top and it killed him. Well, his wife was due to have a baby in about a week. So in those days, there were no benefits for pilots, no death benefits, no medical benefits, nothing. So Fire Captain Ron Thomas up at Santa Rosa started, along with Bill Tiki Morris, started a memorial fund to try to help this woman with this kid. And they did everything they could to make money, sold T-shirts, sold hats, you name it. And then we started the golf tournament, which you guys all, Marin County Fire was so key in the success of that. They organized it, they put it on, we made a lot of money, and it helped a lot of people. A lot of widows and orphans benefited from the efforts of Marin County firefighters, the work they did on that. And so we started the Memorial Fund, and this last year was such a bad year, not with our crew, not with our CDF crew, but we lost so many pilots this year that we ended up giving away about 50 grand out of that little Memorial Fund. Wow. So we had about 150, thanks to Marin County Fire and a few good donors. But, it was a very, very costly year for firefighters, both on the ground and in the air this year.
Jimmy, the evolution of the aircraft today, where we have large air tankers and very large air tankers. Your thoughts on the incorporation of those aircraft?
I think it's an incredibly good development. Our emphasis, once again, initial attack. We're not going to see a DC-10 or a 747 on a 5-acre fire in front of your house. Once it goes into extended attack and we have life and property at stake, those airplanes play a key role. And like here in Marin, I think you guys probably agree with me, there's probably 10 or more Paradise Fire scenarios right here in Marin County.
Oh, I would agree with that.
And the only way we're going to get to those. Evacuation and rescue is going to be problematic up in those hillside communities, and the only way we're going to respond to some of these places is with air support. And the big air tankers, I think, can play a really key role in that. You can make the safety zone with a 747, even in a high wind situation.
Jim, how about any close calls during your career? I know you've probably had a couple.
I've had more than a couple, but most of them were.
And were they like low altitude or engine issues or?
I've had a few engine failures, but that didn't result in any near miss. Usually it was perception problems, target fixation. Like when I was working with you guys here, I was pretty much a rookie still, real motivated to fight the fire. And you get too fixated on what you're trying to do and you lose your situational awareness. That's when a pilot gets into trouble. Same with a firefighter, but it happens a lot faster in an airplane.
Tell them the story about the DC-6 at Lake Sonoma.
Oh, those were two friends of mine. Ted Bell, the one who was killed at Mill Creek, was the co-pilot, and Gary Nagel was the captain. And they hit a pine tree, and
Didn't crash.
the logs came. One of them came through the windshield. It took didn't hurt the pilot, but it took him out of commission for a while. And the co-pilot had to fly out of the hole. He had no windshield. And he managed to get it back until the pilot recovered enough that they could fly it. But they took 3 hits. One pine tree hit the nose, and 2 both inboard engines took a hit. Wow. And flattened the leading edge of the wing. They lost all of their gauges, didn't know what they had running there.
But they were able to keep it in the air.
They kept it in the air. Ted Bell told me, he said it felt like the airplane stalled. The wheel just came back in their lap. And he managed to take over and fly it out of the hole there and get it out of the valley there. And then the captain came back online and he flew it back to Santa Rosa. And they got it back. But that was a real close call. Both of them were killed in S2s a few years later.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had our share of casualties, but I think the improvement, just like what I've heard you guys talk about today, the evolution of training. We've gone light years from those days. We've got right now. I think we have the best air tanker pilots we've ever had, the best trained, and the best equipment, and the accident rate has gone way down.
Jimmy, I know you're a long time Marin resident, grew up in Marin. I've flown over Marin numerous times. And when you take a look at the fire risk for Marin, what scares you the most?
It terrifies me. Fire. You coined the phrase that I've used so many times. Marin County is an uninterrupted, continuous fuel bed from beyond our north borders all the way to the Golden Gate Bridge and on both sides. And we have at least 10 Paradise Fire scenarios in Marin County today where we could have catastrophic events where we could lose a lot of homes and lives. In Paradise, a lot of the people that were killed were trying to evacuate. They only had one route in and one route out. And we're in that situation in many areas of this county.
Infrastructure-wise, road-wise, I think worse than a lot of spots.
Mm-hmm. And just from I'm just a pilot. I'm not a firefighter like you guys.
No, you're a firefighter.
But from having a ringside seat for 30 years and watching fires, what I can see is that we really have to designate and improve safety zones where people can go to survive. We're not talking about saving homes and cars and talk about saving lives. Yeah, we need to identify and improve safety zones. To me, that's the only way we're going to save people. Is evacuation and rescue becomes problematic if not impossible when we get a firestorm. We're not going to be able to use that aviation assets the same way, but we can still use them in an emergency. Like I say, 747 can make a safety zone just about. You know, you have to use them correctly and safely, but they're a huge asset. And you can stage to any fire. You know, we're talking about pure jet aircraft. We can stage to a fire now anywhere within an hour in California, Nevada, Oregon.
So it's, you know, we were talking earlier, Jimmy, we're talking about aircraft and aircraft firefighting now and the improvements you've seen in your career. And we had the same thing, you know, earlier when the three of us, four of us sat around and talked about how it was in the 60s and the 70s with the equipment we were using back then. So there's an analogy there too. And technology has helped in a lot of ways.
I was thinking the same thing listening to you guys talk about the development of fire. It's the same evolution. Well, the DC-4 that I used to fly was built in the late 40s, you know, and it was a great airplane, but it was an antique, you know. And,
kind of like some of the guys in this room.
Yeah, right. But the job that our guys are doing now, and it's not any piece of apparatus that it's the system. It's the great command and control that's been developed, you know, working with Cal Fire or Marin County Fire. You know, there's going to be some pretty competent people down there to tell you what you need to do. That makes all the difference. But I am concerned about our situation here in Marin, especially it seems like the firestorms are moving.
Yeah, that's something else we've talked about too, is the frequency in fires in the last 10 years has been unprecedented. I remember my first major interface fire was Oakland Hills in 91?
91.
And we said, well, you know, we'll never see one of those again.
Mm-hmm.
We've had catastrophic fires that have wiped out. And here in Marin, we're just kind of in a fool's paradise in a way.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's very true. There's an apathy that exists here that it's going to cost people their lives.
I'm afraid that's true. So we need to get people out fast, but with the knowledge that we may not get a lot of the people out. So there has to be someone where for them to go and survive. You know, there's got to be, you got to identify places where people can survive and improve them.
That's a good point. I've never, you know, they're talking about all this fire prevention stuff now and prescribed fire, but that's an excellent point. Creating some safety zones that pre-exist, identified, and people know how to get to them.
Yeah.
If they can take it out.
You know, Jim, perfect example would be, you know, Sleepy Hollow. There's one road in and out of Sleepy Hollow unless you got four-wheel drive. Mm-hmm. And you go up to the school, that might be dependent on fire activity and all that. But up at the couple of schools that are up there might serve really well as
there's three of them in there, and they'd all three of them would serve well as safety
refuge
zones.
for some people.
Absolutely, you can take refuge there.
Jimmy, any words of wisdom for maybe a young battalion chief that hasn't used air tankers much or directed air tankers from the ground? You know, the battalion chiefs and core members of an organization that may be working with the air attack on just sitting down pre-season with the air attack.
I think that's critically important. You know, and maybe even have some training exercises. You could even do it here in Marin, where they could put an air attack overhead and bring tankers in during training and have them drop water for your ICs.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode with Flying Firefighters, brought to you by the Marin Fire History Group. And you can see us anytime at marinfirehistory.org.
The way we directed the aircraft was the assistant chief on the fire would tell me where he wanted a drop made on the fire. And I was on the phone with the region office dispatch in Santa Rosa, and I would tell them where the assistant chief wanted the drop. Then they would have to get on the radio to the air attack plane and tell the air attack plane where we wanted the drop made.